Hola, hola, amiga. Have you ever wondered why there is so much shame about sex in the Latinx community? Or why these teachings and beliefs are so ingrained in us that it may affect our sex lives? If you are a mommy to be, a new mommy, or an experienced mommy who is curious about having the talk you wish you had con tu mamá, make sure to tune in on this episode porque we are going to talk about sex. In this week's episode, we welcome Ana Lopez, who is a certified Latina sex coach and doctoral student on human sexuality. Oh, hey, future doctora. She is the founder of Sex in Spanglish. She is on a mission to help mujeres ditch the shame around sex, and she teaches them how to have guilt-free pleasure. She is passionate about helping her clients, which the majority of them are mommies, to bring back their sex lives. Although I cannot speak on behalf of all of us Latina women, but I am pretty sure that we grew up not knowing much about sex, nor our bodies. The Catholic guilt was so real to me, and frankly, it wasn't until I became a mommy that my sex life was pretty revolutionized. Isn't that great? So I recommend that you listen this either with yourself or even with your partner, pero definitely without your peques, because this is one of those episodes that is made para adultos only. All right, well, let's get into the episode with Ana Lopez. You're listening to the Viva la Mami podcast, a podcast about all things madrehood. I'm your host, Jessica Cuevas. I am a mother of one on a mission to redefine the meaning of motherhood as a first-generation, bilingual, and bicultural Latina mommy. Regardless if we feel like a failure from time to time, or if we succeeded with the little things in our motherhood journey, it is important to celebrate all of these experiences as madres. So, bring your cafecito as I invite you to be a part of this space and create raw and honest conversations about the exciting and challenging parts of being a mommy. Ahora, vámonos. Hola, Ana, ¿cómo estás?
Bien, bien. How are you? I'm excited to be here.
I am so thrilled that you are here because I felt that a lot of what you say on Instagram and social media, like so much of it resonates to me, but it'll also resonate to many Latinas out there. I think our listeners are going to get to know a little bit more about not just your expertise, but also just ways in which they can be empowered when it comes to their sexuality, wellness overall, and especially as they go through that transition to motherhood. And so if you can quickly introduce yourself, you can tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah. So my name is Ana. I am a doctoral level sexologist and a certified sex coach. I work mainly with the Latino community. That is like where my heart lies. Of course, everyone needs sex ed. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. But my heart really lies with the Latina community and really educating them about sex and sexuality, about their bodies, basically all the things that we didn't learn growing up. And also really having them like know that it's okay to honor and cherish like the things that they love about their culture, but also leave behind the things that don't really serve them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can definitely delve a little bit deeper into that, right? Because there's so many perceptions and misconceptions and even like taboos as it relates to like sex and the well-being and health. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about what like sparked your interest in being a sex coach and your business as well, which is Sex in Spanglish, which is
Yeah.
awesome. I just love it. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So when I got to college, so I've always been interested in sex. Like from a really young age, I was very curious about like what is sex and like not just like the act of sex, but like what goes on behind it. I was always very curious about bodies and their functions and what they do and all of those things. You would have thought that I would be like a doctor or something. I mean, I'm going to be a doctor, but not a medical
Yeah.
doctor. So I was always just really interested in that. But because there is not like a direct path, like, oh, I want to be like a sex coach, right? There's not like this direct path to get there. So I just went into school. I actually started college and I was supposed to do forensic pathology. So doing like
Mm,
autopsies. And
wow.
I was like, yeah, I don't want to sit in another science class. I had to take like 4 chemistry classes. I was like, no, this is it. We're done. So I switched to therapy or psychology actually. And I was on the track to be a therapist. And that's when I found coaching. And so really quickly, I'll like give a quick explanation as the difference between coaching and therapy. So I feel like I'm in a very unique space because I do have a background in therapy. So I was trained in therapy. I can go and sit for the boards right now if I wanted to. But what I soon realized was that coaching is more of my style. I don't want to diagnose people. I want people to come to me, tell me what's going on with them, and we figure out, okay, this is your situation. Now, what do you want to do about it? I don't want to be the person that's like, you have anxiety, you have this. Like, tell me, I want people to tell me their experience, and I want to work with them. I want to collaborate with them so that they can decide how they like want to approach their life, like how they want to live their life, right? I want to give them that power back that oftentimes they feel like that they don't have. So yeah, that's kind of how I landed into coaching. I started out as supposedly going to become a therapist, and then I ended up in this like falling into this internship where I was coaching, and then I was like, oh, this is my jam. This is
That's
what I'm
awesome.
gonna do. Yeah.
That's great. And so with your practice in sex and Spanglish, like what kind of things do you offer? Do you get clients who are moms and who are going through the struggle, and whether if it's trying to conceive or, just going back after postpartum or years after they've been married, like they're like, oh, I'm not satisfied. Like, can you tell us a little bit more about your clientele?
So I get like all of those things you just mentioned, and I love it because it's like such a variety, and also something that kind of brings them together, right? They're like, oh, I remember that. And like they have like their own little like connection with one another in that way. And I get to just be a part of that and provide like the professional expertise, but also guide them in, what they want to do. So people that are in my program come to me because they are not satisfied with their sex lives. So either they're having like horrible sex or not having sex at all. They have some type of obstacle that's like stopping them from having sex, or they're like, my sex life is great, but also I just kind of want like some type of coach, and you're working with Latinas and this sounded great, and I want to be amongst other Latinas, and I also like talking about sex, so like let's work together. And so we can like enhance their sex life if it's already going great, right? I think that there's always room for enhancement. I was going to say improvement, but enhancement.
Yes.
Even if you're already like satisfied with your sex life, that doesn't mean that you can't like up the ante a little bit, like find something else exciting, to stay excited about. So about moms, yes, I think I was trying to think if I have any clients that are not moms, and I don't think I currently do.
Oh,
And it's a wide
wow.
range. So I have like grandmas, and I also have moms that are like, one of my clients, her baby's going to be 1 next year, right? So it's like a wide range.
Yeah.
I've had 2 clients that came to me specifically because they were having trouble with sex with their husband because they were trying to get pregnant, whether it was for the first time or the second time. And they were just like, it was not happening. And so sex became a chore. And they're like, now we have this problem in addition to the perceived like infertility, and they were just really struggling. And so we kind of worked through that together and like talking about like, okay, like, yes, sex is how you have a baby. And this is like, it doesn't have to be the only reason why you have sex. And so we really worked through like their mind blocks on that and just got them like enjoying sex again and relaxing enough. And I mean, I'm not a medical doctor, but if you are constantly stressed, your body isn't prepared to have a baby. Your body's like, we're too stressed to get pregnant. So why would we let you have a baby, essentially? So relaxation of any kind is actually really beneficial if you're trying to conceive. And so they actually both ended up pregnant. And they had like, that was amazing. And one, unfortunately, she actually ended up losing her baby, unfortunately. But, we worked through that as well. And at the same time, still working on like that sex part. So like, what is sex after miscarriage? Like, what is sex during pregnancy? What does sex look like after like the loss of our child? Like, what does that look like? And so I have clients that are on the spectrum, I guess.
Yeah.
There's like this huge spectrum as it relates to motherhood and sex.
Yeah, that is awesome. And it's interesting because I think that for many folks, you assume that once you find your partner, you get married, like that is it. You think that you are an expert, you think that you're going to be satisfied, but a lot of things can happen, not just within your own relationship, but also like other nuances if you are trying to conceive, or like how you mentioned after losing a baby or miscarrying, like how does that look like? Or even like when you go through a grief process, losing a parent or something like that, like how
Yeah.
does, your relationship with your body and sex, like how does that really look like? And yeah, so I never thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all relative.
Yes, yes. In terms of the Latino community,
Mhm.
like in your opinion, why do you think that there are so many kind of taboos around sex? Like, and I guess I'm asking this question more so because of my upbringing, and I'm sure that many
Mhm.
Latinas can resonate with this, where that just wasn't discussed, it wasn't talked about, it's almost
Mhm.
like an embarrassment. I had the privilege, I would say, that I had the talk, with my mom, and
Uh-huh.
I don't know if my dad was around, but I do remember my mom having that conversation because she grew up with four sisters. She was the oldest and she didn't have the talk with my grandma. She really wanted for me and my sisters, which I don't have brothers, like to be aware about our bodies and, just transitional things that would happen, during our puberty years and things like that. So I really appreciate that. But she literally did it like a maybe rated G, PG version of it, where,
I love that.
unfortunately, I didn't know much about my down
Yeah.
there area, right?
Uh-huh.
And it really didn't happen until after I gave birth, where I was like, oh my gosh, my body can do this. So I guess, like, why do you think there's so many like taboos and also even like misconceptions of sex within the Latino community?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of twofold. I don't even know if that's the right like dicho for it, but that's what we're
Mhm.
gonna use. So,
Yeah.
so from my studies way back when, depending also like I Latinos are not a monolith, like wherever you
Mhm.
stem from, typically a majority of individuals were very open as far as like sexuality and what that meant and all of those things. So as like things started happening like colonization, all of those things, we became a very like as we started adopting like Catholicism and all of that, it became kind of very like taboo to talk about
Mm.
sex. We weren't supposed to, and it was actually quite dangerous to be talking about, saying certain words or like how you express yourself and things like that. It became actually very dangerous. Now Latinos are also a very traditional culture, which can be beautiful in many ways, and that also means that we oftentimes don't question things. When we talk about cultures that are very like traditional in nature, that typically means we're just repeating what our parents taught us without asking questions. It also, in many Latino households, it's also seen as like disrespectful to be curious. And even if it's coming with innocent intentions, as like, let's pretend like I'm a 5-year-old kid and I'm asking you, like, hey, mom, like, why do we do this? It can be seen as disrespectful, even if the intention is very innocent. So we
Mhm.
soon learn that we're not supposed to ask questions because that is seen as disrespectful. So then we don't ask questions. We learn things and they could be right or wrong. We don't know. Like, and when I say right or wrong, like incorrect factually or correct factually. And we just assume, right? And so then we pass that on to our children because, well, that's what mom taught me. So I'm going to tell my kids. And it just keeps passing down. And when we don't ask questions, like nothing ever gets resolved. And what I see with a lot of my clients is that even though they've learned at some point that some of these things that they learned are factually incorrect, like tampons cause you to lose your virginity, for
I
example,
learned
right?
that.
Yeah. And so while they learned, like many of them, like in adulthood, that like, oh yeah, that's actually not true, they struggle with accepting that that is 100% true. They're like, okay, I know, like wink wink, okay, yeah, that's not true. But like a little voice in the back of their head, I call it like the mom voice in the back of their head, like their mom is like, no, that they're wrong. No, tampons lose your virginity because my mom told me that, right? And so
Mm.
it's really like this struggle of like, do I not believe my mom or grandma or whoever it was, or do I believe what I'm learning here? And if I do believe something else, something other than what I learned growing up, what does that mean about everything else my parents told me?
Mm.
Right? What does that mean about our relationship that we have? Did they lie to me about everything? What does that mean? And that sometimes can be very scary to kind of confront, especially if you're doing it on your own. So many people just, what I've seen is like, if they're doing it on their own, they're kind of just like, okay, well, I'll take in this information, but I truly believe what my parents told me.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that is so interesting. And I think it's because we have to respect
Mm-hmm.
adults and authority figures and yeah, that is so true. And it's so interesting how even that affects like your meaning of sexuality, right? And
Right.
yeah, that is so interesting. And so like when it comes to that and kind of going back to like the clients that you work with, or specifically like the Latina moms that you work with, how can one reconcile with those beliefs? I don't know, like what is there?
Yeah. So what I noticed in probably like I would say all of my clients is that they've never necessarily been given permission to decide what it is they want to believe without fear of repercussion.
Mm.
So really what I do with them is I like metaphorically give them permission because they already have it.
Yeah.
But it feels nice when someone's like, yeah, like you can do this. So I like metaphorically give them permission and be like, okay, we're going to do this right here. You have permission to decide what it is that you want to believe. What do you believe? You don't have to act on these things. You can go back to believing what mom and dad said, but what do you believe? And then we kind of compare the two. How do these two lists compare? What did mom and dad say? What do you actually believe? And how can we kind of turn down the notch on like that mom voice that is in the back of your head that is probably going to be there forever? Like
Mhm.
you heard it for how many years now? You're probably still going to hear it because mom like never shuts up. Like she's always talking to you and telling you things usually, right? And so like how do you turn down that voice when you know that it's not you, right? Like a
Mm.
lot of the things that we think that we believe that like, oh, I always tell myself this or whatever, they're not really our beliefs. They're the beliefs of the church that we grew up in, the
Mm.
school that we went to, the communities that we were around, la tia amargada. Yeah, so like our mom, our grandma, like whoever, right? Like they're like these thoughts that were just given to us, and because we never questioned them, we just took them and ran with them. We're like, oh, this is
Mhm.
the truth, this is what it is. And so
Mhm.
it's really about reconciling like what it is that you truly believe. And also, just because you don't believe something, you don't believe the same thing that your parents believe or your family or whoever, that doesn't mean that you can't have a relationship with them. Like
Mm.
it's a yes and not an either or.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, it gives perspective too, just to allow yourself even like the freedom, if you've been curious about, I don't know, trying different things or new things, right? Like just allowing yourself permission to do that. And it's
Yeah.
almost like that Catholic guilt, right? Like, oh, me está viendo
Right.
Dios, like,
Yeah.
and it's so hard
Exactly.
to remove that, even though,
Yes.
even though, like, that you and your partner want to do new things or whatever it is, right? Like,
Right.
it is so interesting. Yeah. As far as with like sex in Spanglish, how do you cater the needs of women? Do they have their own different needs? How do you cater that to them?
Yeah, definitely. So the way that I work with my clients is in my group program called La Sinvergüenza Symposium. So it's really about reclaiming the word sinvergüenza and like separating it. So it's literally like
Mm.
sin vergüenza, right? So like without the shame. So yeah, all my clients come to me and we do group coaching. So essentially just what that means is they come and they're like, hey, I want to talk about this issue that I'm having. It doesn't have to be sex related. And the reason for that is because really the way that I coach my clients is that I believe we are all holistic beings. So that means, if you're having trouble in the bedroom, you're probably having trouble at work or trouble with your parents
Mm.
or whatever that is, right? You could be having a really stressful, maybe you have a really stressful relationship with one of your friends or your family members. Maybe like you hate your job. And so then that's impacting your relationship, or it's impacting sex, right? Like it all ties back to one another. So we don't always talk about sex. I do teach a lot about sex in my program. So, the things that we didn't learn, right? About like maybe how to clean ourselves properly and make sure we don't get infections, like talking about STIs and sex positions and why this position might be better for you than this position, depending on your body, and like all of those things. I talk about all of those things, and that is readily available to anyone that joins the program. And we also like do talk, so similar to therapy, right? Like we do coach through that. I talk you through, I ask you questions. What are you thinking? Why do you think this way? Where did this messaging come from? Did you hear it from mom? Did you hear it from el padre? Did you hear it from school? Like, who did you hear this from? Why is it a problem? Like, what is going on? And really getting down to like the root of the issue. Because oftentimes when we try to resolve problems, we're just like, oh, well, I have this issue and let me just try to do something else. And really what's happening is you're just putting a Band-Aid on it. Like, why is this an issue to begin with? Why is it happening? Why don't you want to have sex? Not that not wanting to have sex is a problem, but if you're telling me that it's a problem, why is it a problem to begin with? Why don't you want to have sex? What's the real reason why? And really getting down to like that core belief or beliefs, even those thoughts that you're having, and really talking through that. So sometimes that means we talk about sex. Sometimes that means we talk about your mom, something traumatic that happened to you as a child. Sometimes that means, I don't know, I coached my client the other day. Her daughter has a phobia of going to the dentist, like a true phobia. We talked about that, like, because that's impacting her sex life, right?
Yeah.
And we don't only have to talk about sex. I have another client who just started talking about sex with me for the first, she's been in, so for like the first 3 or 4 months, she wouldn't talk about sex because it was almost like too painful for her to talk about. She was too embarrassed to talk about it, but she wanted to learn. She had the desire to learn. So we don't even have to talk about sex in order for you to, address your sex life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like there is a mindset, attached to it. Like, yeah. And I've personally struggled a lot with sex, like right after having a baby. Like it took us a long time. And I think it's because I didn't really trust my body. I didn't really know my body. And I also thought that you could just get in bed and that's it, right? Like there's so many things, like lube. I never knew about lube. And and so your brain is like the main organ that almost manipulates everything. And
Yeah,
it's not
totally.
it's not because you feel safe or that you've been in a long-term relationship and commitment, with your partner and you're open. Yeah, that helps, but it's your brain. Like if you don't have your mindset to it, like it's going to affect everything. So I didn't know about that, and I'm glad that you shared that too, how, you work with your clients and how you can help remedy some of the core issues involved, and that way they can just, enjoy it and be present with
Yeah.
their sex life. Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess we can shift over to questions that I prepared as far as with like anywhere from pregnancy and postpartum, just because I feel like that is such a big part of our lives, specifically for moms, of how our sex life is going to go, right? The first question that I have, is it normal to have sex while you're pregnant?
Yes, it is totally normal. And it is totally safe given that your doctor is like, it's okay. I know there are some people that have high risk pregnancies, or for some other reason, they shouldn't have sex. So you always want to like get the okay from your doctor first. But other than that, it's fine. As long as you're comfortable and it's consensual, you're good to go.
Yeah. And are there any kind of like benefits to it?
Yeah, so it is said that towards the end of your pregnancy that it can also, like, the orgasm can like help, if you're having trouble having the baby, like maybe you're late, right? So supposedly, I don't know how true this is, but supposedly they say that having sex similar to walking, right, helps you along, helps the baby to be like, all right, it's time to go. Like, let's do this type of thing. So maybe if you're planning a cesarean, maybe avoid, but of
Right.
course always check with your doctor. And I think throughout, definitely, like, as long as you feel comfortable, and I think that orgasm especially, and just that intimacy and connection with your partner can be definitely beneficial. If that's something that you enjoy, why not do it? Just like
Yeah.
if you enjoy walking or reading, just like anything else, I
Mm.
think it's totally fine as long as you're enjoying it. The only reason I would say not to do it if it poses a danger to the baby, if you're uncomfortable or in pain, or your doctor is like, hey, let's not do this for a little bit.
Right. Okay. Okay. Yeah, and I think again it's all part of that taboo like
Mm-hmm.
way of thinking, especially within Latinos, that once you do the deed, you're not able or you can
Yeah.
quote unquote, do it or, have
Yeah.
sex. And it's, yeah. And that was my perception too, which is so
Yeah.
interesting, right? And I think it's about like trusting our bodies, knowing our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously within the consultation of like your medical provider. But I think that yeah, oftentimes a lot of women just stop because they are not either interested in it, they have low libido, or they feel like they're too big or what have you. But being that it can help induce pregnancy at the very end, I think that there's a lot of benefits, yeah, to
Yeah.
it.
Why not?
Yeah, once women become moms, like how can specifically Latinas, right, like revolutionize their sex lives once they have a baby?
Yeah, so I think it's not forgetting that like you are you first. So a lot of
Mm.
times what happens, and especially in Latino households, because we are very like community and family oriented, which is beautiful, and I think almost to a fault, is that we forget that we are humans first, right? Like you came before your child. If you are not taking care of yourself, you are not able to take care of anyone else, right? And
Mm.
so, like, you also deserve pleasure. And this goes for sexual and otherwise. And so, I think, like, really recognizing that, like, it's okay to put you first. And we often like hear the word like, oh, that's selfish. Like, if we're going by the definition of selfish, like putting yourself first technically is selfish. But the question that I want to pose to your listeners is like, why is that a bad thing? Like, why is being selfish bad? Because if you never focused on yourself, if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't not drinking water, if you're not sleeping well, if all of the things, your children are not being well taken care of because you cannot be fully physically present or mentally present. You are
Mm.
not ensuring that you're living a long life for them either, right?
Mm.
Or for your partner, if that's the case, right? And so it's really important that you take care of yourself first because you're also modeling to your children that it's okay to take care of you,
Yes.
right? Like it's okay to take care of yourself. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And so I think that first and foremost, I think also like your body changes obviously after you become pregnant, after you have a child, and even if you don't have kids, right? Like your body still changes.
Mhm.
That's just the natural process of aging. And I think just continually being curious, getting to know your body. I imagine many of the people listening aren't very intimate with their bodies. So I don't even mean this in like a sexual way. Like, of course, like if you want to touch yourself sexually, that is fine with me. Do what you want. But I think it's super important just to get familiar with your bodies. Like, what does it look like? What is this mole? Like, is this normal for me? Is this how my breasts normally look? Is this how I normally smell? Not even just from a sexual perspective, but to be able to advocate for yourself, to talk to your doctor, like, no, actually, this is not right. Because especially as women of color that are going into hospitals more often than not to give birth, like it can be very dangerous. Like
Mhm.
giving birth is like a serious thing. We talk about it as like we're just going in, for a regular pap smear, but it's very serious and many people die or almost die giving birth. And so it's
Mhm.
super important that you know what's going on with your body so that when you go and talk to your doctor and you know that something's wrong, you can advocate for yourself because that is your responsibility. It is not your doctor's responsibility. And
Mhm.
I think that, especially in our culture, we fall into this trap of like, oh, well, the doctor knows best. The
Mhm.
doctor knows the science best. The doctor knows what is kind of like the average or typical thing for a person. And a pregnancy or whatever, but you are supposed to know your body because you are with your body 24/7. So you need to be able to advocate for yourself. And if anybody is struggling with like, whether it's pregnancy related or any other like medical thing that they're like, I want to talk to my doctor, but I don't know how, I'm more than happy to have that conversation. Like, I'm not going to charge you for it. Like, it's super important to me that people are able to feel that they can advocate for themselves. If you're not comfortable talking to me, I definitely invite you to have like a friend go with you so that you feel comfortable having that conversation. But going back to sex, now I like lost my train of thought. So passionate about this part. But as far as like the sex goes, like just knowing that it's normal that your body has like gone through these changes and just really familiarizing yourself with your body. And it's totally okay that it doesn't look the way or feel the way, or even maybe even smell the way that it did before. And that's totally fine. Nothing is wrong with you. And just getting really confident in your body and knowing that you are the one that creates the pleasure, not like the type of body that you have or like the amount of cellulite or the amount of stretch marks or like whatever. Like none of that creates any pleasure. I know a lot of women struggle with like, oh, well, my husband sees me differently now because I'm a mom. But his opinion does not impact the amount of pleasure that you receive, because pleasure is an emotion and that is created by our own thoughts. So any amazing sex that you've ever had or any amazing experience you've ever had in your life was created by you. And so I always tell my clients que el placer es poder, right? Because if you really embody that, like you are the one that created all these amazing experiences that you've ever had, that you were the creator of that, and the other people were just kind of like, not the stars of the show, the supporting cast, right?
Sure.
Then no one can take that away from you. So it doesn't matter what your partner thinks, because you can be confident and you can still feel that pleasure for yourself.
Right. Right. Oh, I love that. I love el placer es poder because, yeah, oftentimes as women, we think that we want to pleasure men. And
Yeah.
again, I'm speaking more of a heterosexual,
Mm-hmm.
way, but like, yeah, it's like, ¿cómo lo voy a que tenga placer? Or how am I gonna like entice or spice it up more for
Right.
him? And
Mm-hmm.
it's, yeah, and I love how you're kind of reversing that. Like, how are we also going to pleasure ourselves, right? Like, how
Right.
can we do that? And so I guess like, yeah, like what are some kind of tips that you have as far as with finding our own pleasure as women and as human beings?
Yeah. So it definitely starts out with understanding your body. So my favorite exercise, which most people hate, but that's totally fine, is a mirror exercise. So really getting intimate with your body. Like, what does it look like? Like everywhere. Most people have not looked at their body in a mirror naked at all, like fully naked, looking at all the things. Like, what does my body look like? How does this feel? What does this feel like in a both sexual and non-sexual way? Getting just really intimate with your body. And what I always teach my clients is that we do not create pleasure for other people, and other people do not create pleasure for us. Like each individual is responsible for their own pleasure. So when you are in your head about like, oh, ¿cómo lo voy a placer? Like, how am I going to make sure that he feels good? Like, that's his responsibility. And not that you shouldn't care that he's enjoying himself, but if he doesn't feel pleasure, it is not your fault. And if he does feel pleasure, it also, you can't give yourself credit because he was the one that was allowing that. And we know that this is true because there have been times where you've had sex with someone and it was like mind blowing. It was amazing. And there's been another time you've had sex with that same person and you've been like, that could have been a lot better, or that sucked, right? Because you were mad at him or you were mad at something else, your kids were stressing you out, whatever it was, right? And it's because of what you were thinking in that moment that was allowing you to relax.
Interesting. Yeah. 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 And thank you for sharing that mirror exercise because, again, going back to our culture, ¿verdad?
Yeah.
It's like you don't even know your own body. Like, and again, I didn't even
Right.
know my body until after I had my child. I spent all these like, how old was I when I became a mom? I was 31 when I had my first child. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything. I didn't even trust my own body. Like De por sí, I struggle with breastfeeding because I didn't really know what nipples were, like that they're different
Yeah.
size nipples, like even that part of my body. And it's so interesting how, for me at least, like I fully embraced my body after I had a child, because my body did all of this to create a life.
Hmm.
And I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm gonna do a little homework assignment for my listeners to just look at yourself in the mirror
Yeah.
and without any judgment, right? Just looking at yourself, and I think that is normal. Again, God isn't going to watch you, you're not going
Right.
to, no one else is going to watch you, just yourself.
Hmm.
And I think that that is very important, to really get to know yourself more, and that way you can be more present once you are, having sex or doing any
Yeah.
sexual activity. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think for a lot of people, like they struggle with it. But I think what helps, at least some people, is that like if you think about it, I'm not just doing this for sex. Like if that's helpful for you,
Mhm.
like yes, do it for sex. And also, it's important, again, going to the doctor, or think about like, do you want your daughter or even your son, whoever, like your child or a little one in your life being like, oh, my mom or my tia or whoever you are to them, like they didn't teach me this. Like, would you want them to have the same experience that you are? Like, it's super important for you
Mm.
to know your body, not even just from a sexual perspective. Like, you need to know your body because that's your responsibility in this world.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I love that. And so when it comes to like couples, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is specifically couples who are in a committed relationship, perhaps they either co-parent or their parents, right? Like, how can mothers communicate with their partner about sex, especially like during the postpartum period, whether if it be that they want to, but their partner doesn't, or vice versa, where, the birthing parent doesn't want to, but their partner does. Do you have any kind of like insight about that, or kind of advice about that?
Yeah. So, kind of going from like understanding your body, really figuring out what it is that you want, because I see this all the time. They're like, my clients are like, yeah, I want, my partner to change, or I want this change to happen. But they're, when I ask them what that even means, they don't know how to explain it. So it's
Mm.
almost as if they're telling me, like, I want more sex. I'm like, well, what does more sex look like to you? Like, what does that mean? And they're like, oh, I don't know. So it's almost like they're going to a restaurant and they're just like, I want food. Okay, well, that's not helpful. So let's get more specific. And so it sounds really like silly and like tedious, but most people aren't able to explain what it is that they want because they haven't figured it out for themselves. So that's really frustrating to hear, be on the like receiving end, someone telling you that they want something different, but they don't know what they want, right? It's like
Mm.
when you're trying to figure out what your toddler wants, like, and you don't know, and you're both like just getting really frustrated, right? So it's like, figure out what it is that you want and like allow yourself to be like, no, I actually do want this desire. And then bringing that up to your partner. And I think it's always beneficial. So I teach my clients that we don't cause other people's feelings.
Mm.
And I think that it's important to approach the conversation without saying, like, well, you do this and you do this. Like, that's very accusatory. And so I think approaching it from like, this is my experience right now, and this is what I've been thinking. Like, this is what I would like to see either from you or like for us to do. Like, this is what I desire. Like, what do you think about that? And leaving it as an open ended question versus like a demand, because your partner never has to agree to something. Like if you're like, hey, I want to try doggy style, like I think that'd be really cool. And your partner is like, absolutely no way in hell, we're never doing that.
Mhm.
You need to honor that, because if your partner was like, hey, I think we should have a threesome, and you're like, absolutely not,
Mhm.
never. And he's like, all right, then I want a divorce. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's totally fine. Like you're allowed to have what you want, but you have to honor your partner's no as well. And I think a lot of times what my clients do, and I've seen other people do it as well, is they will go into these conversations just like assuming their partner is going to say yes. And that if they don't say yes, that the conversation wasn't effective. But an effective conversation, like the goal of a conversation, is to never, it's not ever to have your partner like agree. It's to have them listen and understand exactly what you are asking.
Mm.
And then for you to have a conversation about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And when is kind of like the right time, especially once you have kids, right? When you're just busy
Yeah.
and everything. Like, what are your recommendations to have a very like legit conversation, adult conversation with your partner?
Yeah. Yeah. So I always teach about having consent. So this goes for everything, but
Mm.
especially for conversations. So if you wanted to be like, hey, let's try doggy style, like, let's just continue with this example. Like, hey, I want to have a conversation with you about something. Is now a good time? If
Mm.
they say no, you have to honor that no. But if they say yeah, then go ahead and have the conversation. So if they say no, honoring that no means like, okay, we're not going to have the conversation now, but let's decide on a day and time where we are going to have that conversation. For some people, it's also helpful to have the conversation outside of the house. So whether that means you're having it, I don't know, in the backyard, or it could just mean like even off of your property. You want to go to Starbucks or something and have the conversation in the parking lot. Sometimes that's helpful for some people. Sometimes it's not. It might just be a little bit trial and error, but it's always about asking for consent first, because you wouldn't want to come home from a long day at work, or I don't know, fighting with your parents or something. And then you're like, what now? Even if it is a conversation you're willing to have, you're not going to want to have it. You're not going to be in a good headspace to have that conversation. You don't want someone to just come dump all of this other stuff on you when you're just not feeling it. Like maybe you just
Mhm.
want to go to bed. Maybe you don't want to talk right now. And that's totally fine. But always making sure that it's okay to have the conversation at that moment in time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that communication is key, just like in anything else. And if you have a desire or need, to try something else or do something else, I think definitely allowing the ample space and getting consent. Like, I never thought about that, right? And as Latina women, we tend to be kind of like, well, at least the way that I grew up, like the Latina women in my household were very like outspoken and very direct, and
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of blunt about what we feel and what we think without even asking for permission, really. And I think
Yeah.
that's a reminder, at least for, myself and the women who can resonate with this. And so if the conversation goes where, the partner doesn't agree with it, they don't want to do it, but you actually want to, right? Is there kind of a way to kind of find a happy medium when it comes to different desires, or to what point is it when a couple needs to actually go to therapy together?
Yeah, definitely. So I don't think therapy is ever a bad idea. I
Hmm.
think a lot of times we think that therapy is like, oh, things are going wrong. I think that when things are going good, it's a great idea to go to therapy as well, right? Like therapy is not just for when things are going wrong.
Mm.
So that's definitely something like y'all should do.
Yes.
If you want to talk about sex specifically with a therapist, I have to throw this in there. Be sure that they are ASEX certified, and I can send you a link so that you can share with
Sure.
your folks. A lot of times, clients that I've seen or people that have sent me DMs and stuff will go like, well, I went to this therapist and like they were horrible. And it's like, it's not that they were a horrible therapist, they just weren't certified in sex therapy. And so it's completely different. It would be like you went to your primary care physician when you had cancer. Like
Mhm.
they're both doctors, but an oncologist specializes in cancer. So you're not going to go to your oncologist because you have the flu unless you have cancer. And you're
Mhm.
not going to see your primary care physician because you have cancer. Like it's super important that you make that distinction. And so I
Mhm.
can send a link, where people can find one, that's local to them.
Yes.
So there's that. And I think that it's so when I talk about like sex lives, whenever there's a couple, if we're talking about just like two people,
Mhm.
there's three sex lives that are involved. There's your own sex life, the sex life of the other person, and then the sex life that you have together.
Mm.
And I truly believe that it is each individual's like own responsibility to ensure that they are receiving pleasure. So if there's something that you're like dying to do, that you want to do it, and your partner's like, absolutely not, well, then maybe that's time to open up the discussion about like, okay, like if it involves, like, let's say it involves like a third person, right? Like you're like, no, I absolutely want to have a threesome before I die. And that is not something I'm willing to compromise on, right? Like, no, I'm having this threesome. And your partner's like, absolutely not. I'm not okay with that. Well, then, it might be a conversation about, do we want to open up the relationship? What does that look like? If it has to do with like a certain position or a certain like type of sex or something like that, where it's just you two, figuring out like, okay, how can I get, like, why do I want this position, for example, or like, why do I want this specific thing that I'm asking for? And how can I get it without them, or how can we modify it so that I'm still getting pleasure in that way? So, for example, if you were like, hey, I want to do it doggy style, and your partner's like, yeah, I'm not really into that. Like, okay, well, why do I want to do it doggy style to begin with? Do I just like prefer to not be on my back? Like, okay, well, what other positions can we do? Maybe I like being on my back, but it's just really uncomfortable. So I'm going to buy a prop so that I can, hold myself up so that it's not hurting me. Right. And really getting like curious with your partner, like why is it that you don't want to? And not in an accusatory sense, but just like, okay, like what about this is, not okay for you? And explaining like, this is actually why I want to do it, and really getting curious with one another. Because I think oftentimes we make assumptions of like, oh, they just don't want to do it, they're not into it. But why don't they want to do it? Or why do they want to do this thing? Right? We just make assumptions without asking. And so it's always about curiosity and asking why. And I think asking why sometimes can feel very like invasive, like judgmental almost. And like, no, like, I'm just curious, like, what, how does that interest you? Why does that interest you? What about that? What do you want from that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And just allowing space to open up, especially when you are in a relationship, in a committed relationship. I think just getting to know one another about what is it that you want, and hopefully you can find some resolution, or to make sure that the person feels heard. When it comes to moms, mommies and their sex life, like, how can mommies have a good sex life with having kids, with having so much of the invisible load after a long day? If they intuitively really want to be with their partner and spend the special moment, how can they have a good sex life even though there's just so much going on?
Yeah. So my favorite question is always, how can this be easy? So a lot of times we just assume that it has to be a certain way. And if it's not this way, that it's just not going to happen. And what that does is it doesn't give us the opportunity to see like, oh, maybe I'm really tired at night, but we do have some time in the morning that we could do it, right? Or in the afternoon, or like whatever that looks like. It's really about being flexible. Right. So maybe when your kids are like under 5, it might be really hard to get sex in like throughout the day, like you used to. And that's totally fine. But figuring out like, this is our situation. Now, what are we going to do about that? Given that sex is a priority, and really asking yourself, like, are you prioritizing sex, or are you prioritizing washing the dishes or cleaning the house or whatever else it is? I also think that it's super important for women, especially, to not tell themselves that they have to do something, because I see this all the time, especially with my clients. They're like, oh, well, I have to clean the house and I have to cook and I have to clean, or it's not going to get done. But the thing is that they've never given others the opportunity to do it, right? They'll tell their kids like, oh, can you wash the dishes? And because they don't do it right then and there, then they're in the kitchen right there, like washing the dishes for them. And I'm like, pues ahí vas. Like, you're not giving them the opportunity. Why does it have to be done right this second, as long as it's getting done? Or taking the time to teach their children how to do things that they want done. Like my sister, love my sister to death, but she's like, I hate how they fold towels in my house. And they being like her kids.
Yeah.
Like, I hate how they fold towels. And I'm like, well, teach them how you want them to be folded if you want them done a certain way, or just have them fold it how they want it, right? So it's either
Right.
you're doing it your way, or you're taking the time to teach them how to do it. Like, so I'm a business owner. So I think about like, okay, I train my people. I'm not just like, okay, do whatever you want and get mad when they don't do it the way that I want it done. Right. And so it's like allowing yourself to delegate things. So whether that's to your kids, whether that's to your spouse, like, or your partner, whoever it is, like delegate things, get rid of things. There are many things that we do that we don't have to do things worse. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. You know, if you are financially able to, hire someone else to do it, hire someone to do your laundry, hire someone to make food for you. You can even hire your mom if you want to. Like what better way to support your mom financially and have her make you food? Like
Right.
if my mom did not work, I would hire my mom to buy me food, to make
Right.
me food every day.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. We shouldn't forget about ourselves. We shouldn't forget
Right.
about ourselves. Yeah. If you want this to be a part of your relationship, your life,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that, yeah, not setting up these like high expectations or have this rigidness in your day to day that is going to impede you to do it. And honestly, that was something that I learned in my relationship, especially once I became a mom. I'm like, what are my priorities? What is it that I want?
Yeah.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, and not putting others before me, which I know, again, it sounds selfish, verdad? This is like me, Latina speaking. Like it sounds very selfish, but again, like I also want to do me, right? I want to prioritize on
Mm-hmm.
myself. And I think it's all about mindset. And it's so interesting how that is all connected, right? With your mind and your body and just how you also want to receive pleasure. Yeah, it is so interesting. So, kind of like as we're wrapping up here our conversation, what are some tips you can share with a Latina mom to be or a new mom or any mom about their sex life or about their sexuality? Just kind of some tips that you usually give to your clients.
Yeah. So they're probably going to be tired of me saying this, but like getting familiar with your body, like that is the
Mhm.
very first step. And it's not just a one and done type thing. Like continually, like, where are we at? Like, what does this look like? Like, continually being just like you moms are like, you know, like your baby's butt out of like a lineup, right? Like, you need to be that familiar with your own body,
Mm,
right? And I know it sounds really weird, but it's super important for you to be super familiar with your body. What are your desires, right? Like really familiarizing yourself with your body and deciding like what it is that you want sexually. My favorite brainstorming exercise is just to like, so say the topic is like sex, like if you could have anything in the world, you don't have to go and do it, but just like see what your brain comes up with and don't edit the list as you go. Because if you do that, your brain's going to shut down. You just like write all the things in the world. It could be like, I want to have an orgy. And you're like, I probably would have never do that. I don't know where that came from, but just like write it down anyway. You could cross it out later, but just let your brain free flow for like 3 minutes and
mm,
see what happens. Just like keep writing, like, what would I do? What would I do? Like all of those things. And then from there, be like, okay, what are the things that I actually want that I'm actually willing to go out and try? Or like if you're single, maybe, or maybe, you know, you have a partner and you want to try it with your partner. Maybe you want to have a conversation with them about it. Maybe you
mhm,
just want to like spend a night with your partner looking up what would that even look like? I don't even know
mm.
what an orgy looks like, but I want to have one with my partner and other people. Like, how do we do this? Right? Like
Yeah.
just looking it up, going to a sex shop together, like whatever that looks like, and just be continually having the conversation with yourself, like reassessing like what it is that you want, and also having that conversation with your partner and prioritizing sex if that's something that you want. Because if you say that it's important to you, but you're not prioritizing it,
Mm,
then it's not important to you, right? Like
mm.
you prioritize feeding your children, right? Because that's important to you, but you're not like, oh yeah, I care about that, and then forget to feed them every other day. Like that's not how that works. So
Yes.
it's really important to like make sure that you're prioritizing it.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Some really great tips that I'm sure that even myself, I'm like gonna take with me, but definitely my listeners. And I think we definitely need to respect our bodies, right? And really understand what our bodies were made for as we are evolving within ourselves or our relationships, like just being curious. And I think that is normal. Like, don't let like you said, the voice, right? That mom voice or the God voice or whatever it is,
Yeah.
not get in the way, even though,
Yeah.
yes, we also have to go through our intergenerational cycles of trauma, but I think that it is very important to prioritize on ourselves. So thank you so much for sharing that. Where can people follow you? Are you currently taking clients?
Yeah, definitely. So I am very Googleable. Is that a word? Easy to find on Google.
Yeah.
So it's Sex and Spanglish. I am on Facebook. I'm mainly on Instagram, but I'm also on Facebook if you want to find me on there. I'm on TikTok, Sex and Spanglish, Twitter, Sex and Spanglish, all the socials. I am running my group coaching program, La Sinvergüenza Symposium. The next launch is February 1st. So not sure when this episode comes out, but definitely, you can get on. You can register directly using the link in my bio that is on all of my socials. If it is past February 1st and you're listening to this, I'm most likely still taking clients. So I have a couple launches a year. So there's an interest list in the link in my bio as well. So get on the interest list, and that's where you get all the information sent directly to your inbox about my program, about what I'm currently offering, all of those things. And you actually just reminded me that when we were talking about tips, I have an ebook called Spice It Up con la Sex Coach. And so it's 69 tips to just mom brains are tired. Brains are tired in general. You're like, I don't want to come up with ideas. And so it's just 69 different ways to like spice it up in the bedroom. And you can choose from any of them. You can go in order if you want. And it also gets your brain kind of, the juices flowing is how I call it. Like you're like, oh, that sounds cool. I don't want to do it that way, but I want to do it this way. And you kind of make it your own, but it's a starting point. So you're not like a blank piece of paper. What do I want to do with my sex life? Right. So it's just an idea. So I can send you the direct link that they could just download it directly.
Yes, absolutely. I love the title of it. That's so clever.
Yeah. Thanks.
Ana, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm sure that many mommies are going to get inspired and empowered to like maybe do something new, right? Spice things up, or at least talk to their partners about trying something different, and really recognizing that it is not our fault why we had always felt like trapped into like all these beliefs. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Viva la Mami podcast. If you like this episode, make sure to leave a review and write what episode really resonated with you. If you really loved it, share it on social media or with an amiga. As always, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you are listening. Make sure to follow me at Viva la Mami on Instagram or visit vivalamami.com. Please note the information shared in this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be replaced by your healthcare provider nor taken as professional advice.